Do you believe that if the Weimar Republic had survived, Germany would not have become an ultra-nationalist and expansionist power, and therefore, World War II could have been prevented? I want to consider this issue and propose a realistic answer on how the Weimar Republic could survive and even thrive in the 30s and 40s. I will rely on 35 pages of an essay from Munich University discussing how to prevent the rise of ultranationalists. On a superficial level, this study states that during the Great Depression, which heavily impacted Germany, unemployment reached catastrophic levels, leading to the radicalization of the population. This is very important, as in 1932, about 30% of the German population were unemployed. When the Austrian artist began to promise a better future, many believed him. To prevent the rise of ultranationalists, it is proposed to implement fiscal policy aimed at reducing unemployment in regions where support for ultranationalists was strongest. I will begin this script with the year 1930, specifically with the elections to the Reichstag, which took place in mid-September. This is important because in the previous elections of 1928, the National Socialist Party received only about 2% of the votes, and they were still quite small. However, in the elections of 1930, which took place just 2 years later, support for ultranationalists sharply increased from 2.5% to 18.3%. This made them the second largest political force in Germany at the time. For reference, in the next elections 2 years later, the ultranationalists became the largest party, increasing their support from 18.3% to 37.3%, and a year later, they reached 43.9%. This gave the ultranationalists a colossal leap to power, which they used to turn Germany into a dictatorship. Here is the ballot from 1936, and you can see that there is only one option, with a 99% turnout. Ultranationalists in Germany received 98.8% of the votes. The rest were empty or invalid. Looking back to the year 1930, it truly seems possible that if money had been invested from Rhineland-Palatinate and Bavaria into central Germany and East Prussia, the rise of ultranationalists would not have been so rapid. They increased their support from 2.5% to 43.9% in just 3 years. It makes sense for Rhineland and Bavaria to direct funds to poorer regions, as Rhineland supported the Catholic Center Party, while Bavaria and other southern German lands supported the German National People's Party. The rest of Germany supported the Social Democratic Party, which still held the majority. Eastern Prussia was the only place in Germany where ultranationalists had a majority in the 1930 elections. But by the 1932 elections, they had become a majority almost everywhere, except for the Rhineland and Bavaria. I am simply suggesting a more rational allocation of resources. Money is neither created nor destroyed. It is just used more efficiently to prevent the rise of ultranationalists and their coming to power. This idea may truly make sense. In the studies I mentioned earlier, people much smarter than me conducted a simulation of what I just said and received a positive result. This means that the ultranationalist party was still present, but would not be able to seize the country and turn it into a dictatorship. Another option is to get rid of the Austrian artist who historically became the Führer of Germany. He faced many assassination attempts, but he could have died in World War I or from poverty if his book had not become popular. I understand that removing him does not automatically eliminate the ultranationalist party, and someone like Heinrich Himmler, Rudolf Hess, or even Martin Bormann could take his place. Nevertheless, I believe that the Austrian artist was able to unite all factions of the ultra-nationalist party, and without him, the party would definitely be more fragmented and weaker. It doesn't matter if he dies in the Great War or not, because in this scenario, the Nationalist Party won't matter much, so I won't mention them too much until the end of the video. With this step, I think we have almost ensured the longevity of the Weimar Republic. All we need is for Paul von Hindenburg not to appoint a nationalist candidate as chancellor, which is possible given the declining popularity of the mentioned party. If the Nationalist Party is excluded from the equation, the Social Democratic Party will become the main political party in Germany, but will still not be able to form a government on its own. As a result, they will most likely have to cooperate with other political parties to form a coalition, as has historically been the case. The coalition included the Centrist Party with 12% of the votes in 1928, the German Democratic Party with 4.8%, the German People's Party with 8.7%, and the Bavarian People's Party with 3%. Since this time the nationalists will not be as popular, this coalition will become stronger. Historically, it was said that the coalition faced conflicts of interest, leading to its collapse. But this time, with more votes, it may become more stable. If the Social Democratic Party gains enough votes, it can exclude any party from the coalition if it causes too many problems, and still maintain a majority. There is a possibility of a grand coalition between the Social Democratic Party and the German National People's Party, which were the two largest political parties of the time. As for the German National People's Party, it was a national conservative and monarchist party, serving as the main nationalist party until the arrival of the ultranationalists. The coalition could not function as this party opposed socialism and Catholic elements, just like in the previous coalition of Social Democrats. Nevertheless, if instability arises in the mid-30s in the Weimar Republic, the two main political parties may temporarily cooperate on key issues. Weimar Republic. This is a 5-mark coin issued in 1920, made of aluminum. In comparison, here is a 5-mark coin issued in 1906, which contained 2.5 grams of silver. One can notice how after the Great War, Germany found itself without reserves of precious metals. Here are 5 stamps issued in 1924. Exactly 100 years ago. Now let's return to the video. Considering that the Weimar Republic still exists and is fully democratic in 1935, it is unlikely to change course. If the Social Democratic Party loses its majority in the coalition, which is unlikely but still possible, then, in my opinion, the following events will occur. Ultranationalists still matter and are likely to receive 10 to 15% of the votes, allowing them to become part of the government as a minority. The same can be said for the German National People's Party. As a result, there is a likelihood that these parties will require a democratic vote in Saxony to gain government support, which will be met considering that Saxony previously voted overwhelmingly for joining Germany. This could happen again, possibly with even greater support. This is because in 1935, ultranationalists ruled Germany, eliminating their political opponents. As a result, many opposition parties fled to Saxony and called on the people to vote against unification. If the Weimar Republic annexes Saxony, the Social Democratic Party will use this as a victory and discredit the nationalist parties. Von Hind will likely appoint Hans Vogel as chancellor, and with Kenborg's departure, the Social Democratic Party will solidify its control and form a stable government. Hans Vogel was one of those political opponents of the ultranationalists who moved to Saxony. Judging by the information about him, he is indeed determined to restore the Social Democratic Party in Germany after 1945. Despite Germany's annexation of Saxony, it occurred as a result of a fair and democratic process that France will have to acknowledge. France and the Weimar Republic will have good relations, and before the internationalists come to power, the French actually offered the Germans a deal to increase economic cooperation and address the old debt to France. This is important, as the allies of France and Britain will see how deeply the Great Depression has affected Germany, which may lead to a revision of the Versailles World. A crucial point will be the end of Germany's military actions. It would be ideal, as by the end of the 1930s, the Weimar Republic naturally recovers from the Great Depression and enters an economic boom, attributed to the Social Democratic Party and the democratic regime. In reality, these are just market cycles, but the Social Democratic Party will consider this their victory. There is no doubt that after this, Germany will become and remain a democratic state. This matters as art, literature, and technology will thrive in Germany. When the internationalists came to power, there was a significant brain drain as many left in search of a better life. Fleeing their country, many Germans headed to the United States to continue working on the atomic bomb. For the government, this was not considered Jewish science, and likely the Germans were ahead of the Americans. The American nuclear program included many Germans who had fled from the ultra-nationalist regime, fully aware that this weapon would be used against their homeland. I believe I have touched enough on the cultural aspects of the Weimar Republic, had it survived. Now let's see how other countries will react to this, and whether the Second World War could be initiated by Italy or the Soviet Union. The first country to consider is Spain and its civil war. I don't think anything will change. Yes, the nationalists of Germany sent a lot of aid to Francisco Franco and his nationalist Spain, but I wouldn't say that the Germans became a decisive factor in the Spanish Civil War. I believe that even in a democratic Germany, the nationalists in Spain would still have won, although it might have taken more time. I also acknowledge that Germany historically sent a significant amount of equipment to Spain, but, in my opinion, this would not have been a decisive factor. It would simply have made the war shorter. Italy, as you know, invaded Ethiopia at the end of 1935, and this action was condemned by France and Britain, which ultimately led to Italy's exit from the League of Nations. Historically, France and Britain wanted to keep Italy as an ally, fearing ultra-nationalist Germany, so they recognized Italy's annexation of Ethiopia. I mention this because in this alternative scenario, there is no ultra-nationalist Germany, and the allies of France and Britain will not be so lenient towards Italy. Economic sanctions may be imposed on Italy, as Germany will be seen as an ally rather than a threat. Historically, Austria has been under the control of ultranationalists led by Kosnik. In our time, this is important because I do not know what will happen in this situation, but I do not think the Austrian ultranationalist regime will last long. For the sake of justice, Kosnik may not come to power, but Angel Bertis will remain in power, as the German ultranationalists attempted to annex Austria in 1934. I have already made a video on this topic. If this succeeds, I want to emphasize that the homeland will remain under the control of the Patriotic Front, as the ultra-nationalists of Germany will not attempt to annex the country and will not kill Angel Bertis in the process. Thus, he will remain in power in Austria, which will still be mostly pro-German, especially considering the success of the Weimar Republic observed around the same time. In 1934, about 80% of the population supported unification, but when ultra-nationalists came to power, that number fell to about 50%. We can expect that Thuringia and Germany will be able to unite peacefully with the consent of the allies of France and Great Britain. Frankly, this may happen later than in 1938, possibly 1945. For simplicity, I will immediately say that Germany annexes Austria, but remember that this process will take years, and the homeland front will not be ready to yield control over its country. You may ask why the Allies would allow Germany, their biggest rival, to annex a neutral and peaceful country and strengthen itself further. This is because it would create a direct front line with Italy, which is important for the Germans to have an enemy at their doorstep. I already mentioned how Italy will be viewed with disdain by France and Britain due to its intervention in Ethiopia, and relations will not normalize as Germany will not pose a threat at this time. Nevertheless, I do not expect the annexation of Austria to happen so easily, as Italy had a protective stance towards Austria and only relinquished it after Germany promised her control over the Balkans. Therefore, I think Austria will gradually transition to a peaceful and democratic Germany in a few years, around 1945. But remember, I am just speculating. Even if I am wrong, it will not change the scenario. So stay with me. Now it's time to mention the elephant in the room, the Soviet Union. Undoubtedly, the war between Italy and Germany will not lead to a world war, and worse for Italy, the Allies may join Germany. This will be a conflict that lasts only a few months. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, had the potential and means to start a world war. However, Stalin was not so foolish. He seized the Baltic states, Bessarabia, parts of Finland and Poland only after the start of World War II, when the Allies were preoccupied. I do not expect Stalin and the Soviet Union to start a large-scale war just because of some Baltic country. It is more likely that a compromise will occur. The Allies, France, and Britain were still not ready for a large-scale war, especially the French due to a strong communist and anti-war opposition movement. As a result, I expect Stalin to bully smaller countries lacking powerful allies, such as the Baltic states and Finland. Romania is technically supported by Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, so they will be left alone. A similar situation may occur with Finland, as historically, the allies of France and Britain considered sending troops to Finland during the Winter War. If Soviet troops were to begin a similar intervention again, the Allies would likely support Finland, but I don't think they would officially enter the war. A more likely option would be a strategy of appeasement, which you are probably familiar with. Countries like Estonia and Latvia are likely to be sacrificed, but I'm not sure about Lithuania. This is because if Lithuania is annexed by the Red Army, it will create a direct land border for the Soviet Union and Germany, which could escalate the conflict to the level of a world war. I assume that the Soviet authorities will absorb several countries, but overall, due to the power of the Allies, Stalin will not start a war against them. I would like to mention Japan, and how France's surrender to Germany in World War II influenced its actions. Without this event, the Japanese would not have seen France fall under a Western embargo and would not have started planning to seize resources by force.